get the meeting started and kind of go over what today's meeting's focus will be. And then I'll hand it, okay. And then I'll hand it over to our MAD consultants to lead us after that. So today's meeting was an extra meeting that we had put together because we felt that we needed this kind of extra time to go over the recommendations. So our focus today will to have some dialogue to improve understanding of each of the recommendations. And also feel free to ask questions if there's still outstanding questions to any of the recommendations so that we can have those discussions and that we can make any revisions to the recommendations. And our hope is that by the end of today's meeting, that we increase support for these recommendations, or at least consensus, and then come up with recommendations that we feel we can all support going forward. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Steph.
Yeah, thanks, Senator Pa. Hi, everyone. Good morning. Thank you for being here. Thanks for making more time to continue working together to revise the recommendations. On the next slide, we're just going to share what the next two kind of weeks are going to look like. Today, as Senator Pa said, really focused on discussing the potential revised language of the recommendations that you all received yesterday, and making continued additional revisions to move to consensus. And then starting today through the 20th, we want to invite task force members that are here today and those that weren't able to join us to continue offering ideas for improvement. And this could be through one-on-one conversations with one of us, with myself, Stephanie, or Jennifer, or just by sharing written ideas as Peter, you did earlier today. That was really helpful. Specific recommendations, crossing things out, adding new things is really helpful to move us forward. So we'll be sending out an email after this meeting with that information. But by the 23rd, so next Friday, you all will receive a set of revised recommendations in preparation of the meeting on the 27th. The 23rd is a Friday, so I recognize the 23rd through the 27th is there's some weekend time there. But if you wouldn't mind now thinking about kind of reserving some time in your calendars to carefully review the recommendations, we want to make sure that each member has had time to really look at that draft you'll be receiving on the 23rd so we can prepare for voting on the recommendations come the 27th, which is our next meeting. And of course, if you have specific ideas, narrative that you'd like included in the report, you can continue to send that to us. Um, as we get started, you're not going to hear me talk for too much longer. As Senator Pa said, this is a working session, but we do just want to take a minute to kind of revisit the interview themes that we shared back with you in early October. So we just wanted to remind you all where we started this work together. We thought it would be helpful. So we just have 4 slides here to kind of reground us and where we started. And as we kind of head into today's working session to refine the recommendations, we just want to start with kind of the known context. So from the beginning, you all said DNR, land, state land, public waters are managed by different divisions with DNR, and they each have different goals, laws, statutes, and rules. That was something you named and recognized at the beginning. You talked about how foraging happens for a variety of purposes: food, medicine, recreation, cultural reasons. You talked about how more people on the land would require more resources to both monitor and educate. And there was, from the very beginning, this desire or this recognition that foraging was not always seen or hasn't always been viewed as a legitimate recreational activity on state lands and public waters. Next, you all shared kind of 4 overarching kind of shared hopes. We asked you at the beginning, how would you know this task force succeeded? And you said the task force would succeed if you developed clear and simple recommendations that resulted in accessible foraging on state lands. You said that recommendations would need to be accepted by DNR and the legislature, which also signaled sort of a desire to collaborate and to compromise to find shared ground and to ensure that recommendations were balanced. And then you also talked about the significance from the beginning of supporting cultural practices, including traditional ecological knowledge and things like the honorable harvest practices. Um, you also mentioned shared tensions. Two major shared tensions included balancing accessibility now with conservation long term. In the comment there to the right, it says, let's come up with something that allows humans to forage and nature to thrive. So that was one of the things that you said from the very beginning. We need to sort of figure out what is this balancing act. Another person in an interview shared there's two sides of the coin, accessibility for everyone and species longevity and diversity both have value. So it's being able to hold both things as true, and I think you all have been doing that quite well. And then in addition, you said it was important to balance individual rights today with protection for tomorrow. So as we move forward in this work together, just reminding ourselves that finding sort of that right balance of tensions is where you all are going to come up with the best solutions, the most creative solutions. And it's important to know that these ideas at kind of both ends of the continuum really have value. So the goal of the task force is not for us to argue about whether accessibility now or conservation long term has more value. Like it's inherent just to recognize that both of those things are valuable and that the opportunity for you all in this group together is to just sort of find that right balance. Um, Finally, you sort of identified what you thought were some important actions that you'd like the group to consider. So you talked about definitions, different rules on different lands, permits, education. I want to just point you to the last bullet, which says recognize that we are not going to solve all of the issues across the landscape. What we come up with may be the best for now. So let's not let perfection be, oh no, I just got that wrong. Progress over perfection. That's the simple way to say it. Progress over perfection. I've heard folks in this meeting and this task force before say, let's maybe view this as phase one of multiple phases, right? Like this is going to hopefully be ongoing conversation and dialogue with DNR and stakeholders. So just, view this as like an important and monumental step forward, but not that you're going to solve all of the issues. So with that, I'm going to move into just a reminder that today is about increasing support and consensus um, of the drafted recommendations. So today's about working together. It's about finding compromises, finding the right balance of tensions, and really getting as many people as possible to the I can at least to the I can live with it, right? That's number three on the kind of fist to five scale. Three represents a yes vote. Um, so we want to, as much as possible, focus on getting recommendations where people can get to this point of I can live with it. Um, so with that, my final slide here, and then I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer to just do a quick overview of the updates to the recommendations. You've seen this slide at the beginning of every single meeting. Two points here are bolded. So the take space, make space in order to have this sort of dialogue with each other. We want to invite folks who are sometimes maybe on the quieter side in this group to kind of step in and step up, share your ideas, your perspectives, your concerns. That can also be in chat. And then if you're someone who's like readily like wanting to share, maybe just hold back for a second or two, see if another person wants to kind of hop in. We want to hear from as many of you on the call today as possible because we want to make sure your ideas are informing the recommendations so we can get ready for that vote in 2 weeks. And then in addition, just stay curious to what other folks are saying. So today is about sort of trying to understand where is the group moving, right? And how do we find compromise so I can at least, or at most everyone can kind of get to the, we can live with this stage. So for a moment now, I'm just going to transition. We're going to get into discussion now with each other. But Jennifer is going to provide a quick overview of the updates and revisions that were made since our last meeting, because Jennifer is the one who sort of took the lead on our MAD team and sort of looking at all of the mural ideas and creating the new revised document that we have together. So Jennifer, go ahead.
Thanks, Stephanie. Yeah, so this is just a quick at a glance, some of the things that you'll see have shifted since the last version. And this is really based on everything that came up in the mural or was shared with us in separate emails or conversations. So I bucketed them in sort of themes of things that have come up in conversation. So you'll see in the first recommendation that definition of commercial activity is now included. That was, I think there was a good momentum around including some definition there. The statute and rulemaking is showing up in a couple of different recommendations. So it's showing up in 2.8 and 10. And so really at a glance, that is now codifying foraging for personal non-commercial use. There is some direction to the DNR to work with MDA on specifically looking at the overlap of foraging activity. And then there is a proposal back on the table around a 5-year limit on further restrictions to foraging beyond the new statute. So that fell off the table at the last during our last conversation, but came back on based on some conversation and feedback. Permits are showing up in recommendations 2 and 7. And so right now, what we had heard was that permits would be required only for harvesting roots and whole plants or for items on a protected list. That protected list would be established based on evidence by the DNR. And then there is language around updating and streamlining the current permitting process and system, so making that easier to use, more accessible for people who would like to forage or harvest things that are on that permit list. The fourth bucket is around access. So the updated language hopefully clarifies a bit more that foraging is allowed on all DNR state lands with the exception of scientific and natural areas. And the aquatic areas right now in the most recent version remained as they are in current statute and rules. There is language around research. So the only thing that was really updated around the research was suggesting a direct allocation for that research to take place. And then the public education and communication, again, this was around funding. So a direct allocation to support foraging education specifically for the public. And then there were some questions about the audience and access for that. And so some language was included that hopefully provides some clarification around accessibility and the primary audience for the new education being the public around foraging. So that's just kind of at a glance some of the changes and updates that were made to the most recent version. So I will stop sharing this and I'll pull up, I think, the Word document here of the recommendations so we can dive into the conversation.
And Jennifer, I can't remember if we decided this or not. Let's work from the version that Peter shared that has his recommendations, because I think that's a really great starting point.
Sounds good.
Peter, I see your hand is raised.
Yes, I just want to say something before we get going, and I want respectfully ask the members of the committee to or task force to think about the fact that this process we're going through, we have as Minnesota an opportunity to really lead the nation. This is a confusing issue across all states, and we have an opportunity to create a framework that other people can look to and see what we do our best to get things right, and possibly look to us to see what maybe didn't go as right as it could. But it is really something that is impacts people, and this will not only lead the nation specifically in this, but lead the nation in bringing uh, a larger portion of the public into the conservation community to help protect our lands. Hunters and fishermen have led the way for the last 130 years, and and foragers, once they make that connection, end up having the same kind of emotions and passion for the outdoors that our stewards have had uh, for many years, and it also echoes the original stewards uh, of this land in terms of not how they lived, but how they cared for the land, and uh, and we need to get more people uh, to see it that way, and this is a great opportunity for that. That I'm very obviously very passionate about. Thank you for listening.
Peter, that was wonderful. Thanks for grounding us in the conversation. You were making me think about how, like, one of the first times I realized that I belong to nature, like the symbiotic relationship we have together. I used to think about it as like kind of power over. I had a different view. Um, so thank you for getting us grounded in today's conversation. As a reminder, we're going to be sharing the updated recommendations, Peter's kind of latest version, because he included some very specific changes or suggestions. Um, just to orient us here to these updated recommendations, the far left column includes votes that were received on the 6th in both support and not support. So if you were a fist 1 or 2, that's a not support. And if you were a 3, 4, or 5, that fell into support. And so you'll see that as we go through these recommendations, there are several that have yellow dots like this. So kind of consensus being some. There's some that have green dots where there's been substantial consensus so far, and then some that do have red dots. And so you'll notice that as we go down, the second column includes the recommendation language that was shared and discussed with all of you on the 6th. The themes of the inputs are in that third column. And then there's the potential revised language that's in that fourth column on the far right. That's where we'll be spending the most time together discussing. And at the top of every sort of revised section, there's a note about the changes that were made. So as an example for recommendation 1, there was some clarity added to include the definition of commercial use. We kept roots listed as harvestable items and acknowledged that permits are addressed in sort of recommendations 2 and 7. And then we have a question here for us to sort of engage with. But I think as we move through our meeting today, really staying focused on trying to improve understanding. So questions, clarifying questions to try to ensure that we're getting to some shared understanding is kind of one of the areas of focus, as well as if you're sitting in a place where you're like, I'm not quite at consensus. I'm not at a 3, 4, or 5. Really sharing your concerns and saying, here's what I'd like to see changed. Here's something I'd like to offer. So we are going to start at the top. We'll probably spend the least amount of time in discussion on green and the most amount of discussion on red, right? That's where we're lacking most consensus. Um, Jennifer and Stephanie are going to chime in if, I'm missing something as I'm kind of guiding us through the conversation. They might tell us we need to speed up too, or even slow down. So any clarifying questions before we get started? And Peter, I see your hand up, and I don't know if that was from before, if you have another question.
No, I have
Oh,
a request,
sure.
and is that considering where I would like to see if it makes any sense for us to go through the green opportunities so that we have some consensus to build on as we move through these, because I know number 2 has been the most contentious about the language. And I'd like to kind of see if we can put to bed things that we generally all agree on and have us, say, okay, we're all good there, and then we can move on to thornier issues. Um, I realize it doesn't follow one, two, three, four, uh, but people often don't. So my
Thanks.
suggestion, thank you.
Thanks for that suggestion. I'm going to just invite anyone. I'm okay following your suggestion. I just want to see if there's anyone else that feels strongly that we should start at one and go in sequential order before we get going. And I see Nibi. Go ahead.
Nibi Ogechida Ikwe, representing Minnesota Indian Affairs Council. I just wanted to make a quick comment to, I believe, also help ground us all into the same space, is that true sustainability is at the heart of traditional ecological knowledge. The more that we recognize this, implement this, and utilize this in all of the recommendations, we are setting ourselves up for success for the people and the future of sustainability. Traditional ecological knowledge was here as the law of the land before any of the rules that exist today. So I feel that bringing up that original science, that original way of living in a close connection with the land and water is going to be beneficial to us all. So I would recommend that as much as we can, we remember traditional ecological knowledge as we write these recommendations. I say that from my heart, and I say that from the ancestral way of living for all of us. So thank you so much for that moment, and I appreciate all of you. Miigwech Padamia.
Thank you, Nibi. Go ahead, Luke.
I have kind of a opposite perspective. I'd rather go to the meat and where the areas that we have the most concern and hash those first. If we already have general consensus on some areas, then we might be able to get there. But to me, two in particular really is the core. It's the core of what the legislative changes would be. And of course, one would be two, because that would be part of that legislative change. And if we can't get to the heart of it, I'm not sure why consensus around other things. Anyway, that's just my general thought.
Okay. I see Peter nodding. Are you open to that approach
Fair,
too, Peter?
fair
Okay.
point, Luke.
Yeah.
I'm not, so this is just my my
This is
take, but
great.
I see your point.
Why don't we do something really quickly? Why don't we scan through as a group kind of where we're at, right? So we get just kind of a sense of how many reds are we, how many reds do we have? How many yellows? How many greens? So the first one is about the definition. We have this one at yellow. The second one is about the new statute, and that's at red. The next one was actually, again, no consensus, but recommendation 3 has now been incorporated into recommendation 2. So no discussion really is not, maybe actually some discussion is necessary there, but that will be part of 2. Then we have developing the education and training and best management practices. That one is at a yellow. Then we move into a couple that have consensus using plain language to provide clear and accessible information. Number 6, it's studying foraging and harvesting and its impacts, again, green. And then improving the existing permitting process, that's also at green with some opportunities, obviously, for improvement. And then we move into exploring partnership with MDA or MDA related to the noxious weed list. That one is yellow. So we need a little more conversation there. Then we also have establishing a mechanism for regular engagement with harvesting and foraging partners. That is a green. And there is, as Jennifer said, a reintroduction of the language around sort of doing data-informed evaluation period. And so this kind of like pause on additional rulemaking. So that one probably also needs, this one hasn't been raised, some more discussion. So if we could, why don't we start at recommendation 2? It's the one that received the least amount of consensus. And how, as we are looking at this screen, is this view okay for folks? Maybe you all have your own copy on a different screen as well, or printed in front of you. But if we need to kind of move into just the right-hand column of potential revised language, we can do that if that works best for folks. So to get us grounded here, I'll just sort of review this note at the top. So this updated language, this potential revision, includes language allowing DNR to establish protected species list and protected areas based on evidence. It does not include limits on personal harvest. It clarifies when a permit would be required, roots and whole plants only. It incorporates feedback regarding explicit recognition of harvesting or foraging as an allowable recreational activity and clarifies land access.
And as you can see, Stephanie Klein will be making live updates based on the conversation and taking notes here so we can all see it together.
So just again, kind of a summary here. The task force recommends the creation of a new statute that codifies harvesting and foraging as an allowable activity on all DNR managed state lands and public waters, making up the outdoor recreation system that's outlined in Chapter 86A05, including school land trusts. That was a new recommendation from the 6th, but excluding state scientific and natural areas. No permit shall be required to harvest or forage for non-timber forest products for personal use using honorable harvest practices for the following. You'll notice here that Peter suggested the inclusion of roots and the deletion here of uprooting whole plants or roots, because I think the comment here is that there are some pretty common plant species, dandelions as an example, that could be harvested whole. And so the recommendation here is about staying focused on allowing DNR to create a list of species that are limited or prohibited for harvest or that would require a permit, and staying focused there. Just as a reminder, this statute would not touch existing wild rice, wild ginseng, or wildflower laws. It would recognize Minnesota Statutes 1065, which outlines the state of Minnesota's relationship and consultation with tribal governments in our state. And then it retains compliance with the federal nexus that Bob was speaking with us about last week, related to wildlife management areas. It continues to acknowledge the sensitivity of state parks and that there are certain places where foraging may need to be off limits. So we talked about Washington's example, using sort of Washington County's example that the group learned from, where you would be able to recognize and designate specific areas that would be restricted. And then again, the final part is about statutory language that acknowledges that personal non-commercial use is a legitimate recreational and cultural activity on DNR managed state lands. And that acknowledges that that right is actually already included in Minnesota's Children's Outdoor Bill of Rights. Okay, so Greg, I see you're first, then David. Again, feel free to ask your clarifying questions, offer suggestions that would increase your consensus. Go ahead, Greg.
Well, I'm just curious here, but we all support, or most of us supported defining non-commercial personal use. Are there some things in recommendations 2 that could also be included in recommendation 1? And my question is basically for the group. I mean, if we change definitions, that in statute, that's a statute change, if I'm not mistaken, or is this just in the DNR rules that we're going to ask for a clarification and define what commercial and non-commercial and personal use is?
Greg, I think
Does
what I hear
anybody
you
have an answer
saying,
to that question?
yeah, I think what I hear you saying is that recommendation one, which defines these terms, would actually need to be part of the new statute as well. Is that what I hear you saying?
Well, I'm asking if that's the
Yeah.
case or if the DNR can just do it. But that would still require, maybe some rule changes in order to incorporate that. So where is this going to be? If we change the definition, usually anything that has a legal status has a definition attached to it. And if it's the definition, maybe we want to try to include some other things that would be part of a definition / clarification change.
Greg, that gets into sort of the implementation, right, of the recommendations, and in some ways, like how will this actually work? A question I have is whether that's the work of this task force is figuring all of that out, or if that's the work of DNR to sort of determine
Okay.
if that needs to be codified in statute. I think it's just a question, and maybe I see that others have raised their hands too, but I'm wondering, Greg, before you lower your hand, related to recommendation two here, do you have any concerns about the revised language or any suggestions for improvement before we
I
move
think
on?
my personal opinion on this and professional is that it covers, I think, what we had concerns about as far as the definitions are concerned on foraging. So, specifically, I think it's working.
Thank you. David, go ahead, and then Senator Green.
Sure. Okay. Thank you very much. And I want to start by reading something. It's the Minnesota Constitution, Article 13, Section 12, Preservation of Hunting and Fishing. Hunting and fishing and the taking of game and fish are a valued part of our heritage and shall forever be preserved for the people and shall be managed by law and the regulation of the public good. All right. So you're asking me, why am I reading that? And also you should probably asking, why do we have that constitutional amendment? The first reason why we have that constitutional amendment is about recognition of a practice, a historical practice in Minnesota that goes back, probably before statehood. We thought it was important enough to put it into the Constitution. The second reason why it's in the Constitution is about the issue of trust. At the end of the day, we put things into law because we want to guarantee things, and we oftentimes don't trust others or don't trust the government on certain types of things. For me, I'm just going to draw a bottom line. I won't support and vote for the recommendations here unless we unequivocally state that foraging is recognized as part of a recreational and cultural practice in the state of Minnesota. Period. That's absolutely it. I think foraging is as important as hunting and as fishing. And for the same reasons that we're recognizing in the Constitution for hunting and for fishing, I think at the very least, we need to put it into statutory form. That's just my comment.
Thank you, Pete. David, did you see, I see Stephanie highlighting on screen, there was an addition of this language to do just that.
Yep.
Statutory language would acknowledge harvesting and foraging for personal, non-commercial use as legitimate recreation and cultural activity.
Yep.
Wonderful. Okay, so that addresses
that addresses my concern. That's why
Perfect.
I just okay. I'll be silent. Thank you.
No, it's great. Great, thank you. Senator Green.
I'm back where I was. I don't really support any of this. You can put me down for 0 on all of it. There are some things in there that I think are good, but by the time you dilute them down with all the other stuff you have in here, we're looking right past and forgetting about the whole purpose why this was called. This meeting was put together so that we could make sure that the DNR didn't come in and put restrictions on harvesting. And this is exactly what we're doing. In this chapter alone, we're giving them permission to even go in and tell us what they believe is going to be endangered and what can be taken, what can be not. When you make a list of what can be taken, everything else is off the table. And so all we really need to do here in this whole thing is just put a moratorium on any new rulemaking until after information comes in, and and then get the classification in that you did put in. And I appreciate that it's simple and it's good for commercial use. That's what we need to do. If this ever becomes a problem, we can come back and revisit this. But like I think if I remember right, in Washington County, the park there, what I think it was 55 people came in and asked for permission to go in and harvest. So we're creating a problem where there is none. And this is going to be extremely hard to get through the legislature. I can see even myself, I'll have amendments to this if it does ever get in. And if you want something to pass that's going to protect the people from foraging, you're going to have to keep it a lot more simple than this. And I don't know how much longer I'm going to stay on. I should be working today, but I'll hang out for a while here and see what's going to go on.
Thank you, Senator Green. Senator Pa?
Thank you, Steph. So I disagree with you, Senator Green, respectfully. I do not believe that we're creating a problem where there is none right now. We are restricted with everything except for a few things that we can forage, which is mushrooms, berries, nuts, and basically almost no plants. We also have a lot of restrictions on access on state lands that the state manages. And those things, the current law right now does not work. It does not give people access to be able to forage on public state lands. It does not give us access to forage anything outside of these few things. So we do have a problem. We have a problem now, and putting a moratorium in, just saying no further rulemaking, it's not going to solve that. It's not going to give us more access. It's not going to allow people to be able to forage. And what we're trying to do here, and I really believe these recommendations will do, is it takes a different approach from saying everything's restricted except for these few things to everything is open except for these few things that need to be restricted for reasons. And these are the reasons. But also coming from the lens of making sure that we are responsible, that we're conserving our resources, that there's education for the public, so they know the best way to forage, so that it is a regenerative way of harvesting. A lot of the education can be done so that we are thinking from the perspective of conservation, and making sure that, like Nibi had said, it lasts for 7 generations and more. So I do think we have a humongous issue, and that's exactly why this task force was brought together, was because we do have an issue in the state of Minnesota. And I do not believe a moratorium on its own will solve anything. It does not solve any of the problems we currently have. It just does not allow the DNR to do any more rulemaking, which doesn't solve, again, the problems we have.
You, Senator Pa. I just want, Greg, I'll go to you next. And David, I see that your hand is still up. I'm not sure if you want to chime in. But I want to invite others to sort of come in to ask any clarifying questions you have about recommendation 2 here, and also offer specific changes you'd like to see made that would get you into this category of, I can live with it. Go ahead, Greg.
Well, I've thought about this before. I just haven't brought it up, but this is probably the place. If we're going to ask for a definition of non-commercial personal use, so that foraging or harvesting for non-commercial personal use means collecting the following as parts of a non-business activity without profit motive. And I would include the statement in here, seeds, berries, nuts, flowers, leaves, fungi. I would preface that by saying included but not limited to, which includes all the peripheral species that we've talked about over the years. And then add another statement that says unless prohibited by rule or statute. So that would take into consideration things that are not mentioned here and broaden the scope considerably in recognizing what's allowable without doing damage to the resource. So I know this probably confuses things, but I think it's extremely important if we ask for something that we, like Senator Pa was stating, that we're broad enough so that we include things that are currently being done and not doing damage to the environment. Thank you.
Thanks, Greg. I think one of the reasons why it was listed the way it is about harvestable items include, or the kind of non-timber forest products, is just this acknowledgement that DNR does have several statutes related to timber forest products. And so there was like this attempt to make a distinction that that's a different body of rural statutes goals. So I think that is maybe the reason why we chose to list those out originally.
Well, is there a huge issue with including a statement like that would be more inclusive and cover those fringe items that, well, I mean, a good point would be dandelions and some other, ground dwelling plants that people do harvest, but if you're picking the roots, maybe, I don't know. I'm just trying to
I appreciate
make
it.
this more inclusive.
Do you see the statement of flowers, leaves, shoots, and roots of herbaceous and woody plants
Yes.
as being kind of
Is that okay? Maybe it is inclusive enough. I mean, ask the
Okay.
group here.
Yeah.
I'm just pointing this out.
Yeah, great. I appreciate that. Thank you for thinking so deeply and carefully about this. Luke, do you go ahead and chime in? Oh, and you're muted. I'm sorry.
So I appreciate Senator Pa's kind of broader perspective of something that was really restrictive, and then switching it to something that's open, but then having some ability to restrict where necessary. I'm struggling with what that balance is. Right now, the switch is all or none almost, right? The binary here is all these things can be harvested at unlimited amounts on these lands. That's a huge change. That's a significantly large change. And I'm trying to figure what that balance is to have some pieces in there that can be managed. If not, I mean, I am concerned about harvesting of roots, and open plants. That has much more impact to land than just harvesting above ground shoots, etc. So I do have a little bit of concern about that. And so if we are going to make everything now unlimited harvest, even for non-commercial use, that's a significant change. And so what are those protections that we need to have in place to manage that? I like the idea of having, if we have sensitive areas, even if it's within it, for example, within a state park, that the state has the ability to do that. So I think there's this balance going on, and then how do you do that, especially around harvesting of shoots. I know there's some species that'd be very easy to, but also the disturbance to the ground, etc. And the other thing I'll mention is maybe we'll come back to is maybe some conversation at some point around aquatic plants, because almost all that's a separate issue. We'll come back. I know you kind of addressed it a little bit, but I'll come back on that. But so I'm still struggling with to get me to a place where I can feel comfortable of for opening this up tremendously and allowing that. What are those safeguards that we have for some protection, especially for allowing now unlimited harvest and pretty much across all state lands except for SNAs, now that we're including school trust lands and state parks. So it's those concerns I have.
Yeah, thank you, Luke. Can we scroll to this section? It's on page 4, where it talks about the task force recognizes and supports that the DNR has the authority to identify and designate specific areas, yeah, within state parks where foraging and harvesting is restricted or prohibited due to land restoration activities, plant surveys, maintenance needs, or other management practices. Luke, I just want to your comment there, right? It's like about balancing this tension of, are we really, finding that right balance? Tell me, does this statement go far enough to get you into a I can live with it? Or what additional changes would you like to see made here to ensure that it's both kind of accessibility now, conservation long term?
And I'm just going to jump in here as part of your prompt to Luke. My note in the chat is that recommendation 7 also talks about local DNR land managers having the authority to set limits. So it's not just kind of DNR statewide saying this part of this state park, et cetera, but if there are local issues or concerns, then the local land managers would have some authority as well. So that's a different recommendation, but I think it's kind of part of that picture of finding that balance between DNR still being able to step in and restrict things when there's a reason for it. And then, okay, so back over to you, Luke, if this if those two elements help address your concerns.
So I see these. I guess it's like probably a lot of folks on the committee. It's the proof is in the pudding, right? What actually gets into statutory or what gets into proposed language. We can make these statements, but how it actually comes out. So yes, I can support this. If you think of me as a non-forager and somebody not saying that, but who's against, I am not. I support foraging, but it's this, for me, it's a balance, and we're going from an all or none kind of proposition here where we have this unlimited and on most lands and most species. So that is a huge flip. And we're saying to do this mostly without permit as well. So it's a huge opening from that perspective. So anyway, so I see that language in there as well. I guess it comes down to what's in the end. I see these little line item changes with, we should be able to harvest all roots, and then a lot about aquatics as well. So.
So sounds like, just to reflect back, Luke, you're in support of the language that allows the DNR to identify and designate specific areas where there's restrictions. And yet you have this concern because it feels like a pendulum swing in a different direction. And you want to ensure, like, you're questioning about, like, how does implementation then actually happen around this? I just want to give you an opportunity to share any additional language or kind of content that you would like included here to kind of get you to consensus, because I do think this is one of the most dynamic tensions this group has been working to find a, balance. And this is, as you've said before, at the heart of some of the work. So let's keep going in this conversation. And Senator Pa, after Luke comments, you can go next, and then Peter.
Thank you for that, Stephanie. I have to think about it a little bit. Yes, in general, I think having some safeguards in place and having some ability to manage when things erupt, or happen that you see on the landscape that you have an opportunity to do. I'm not looking for overly restrictive covenants, whatever, but I am. What are those safeguards that allow for those protection of those spaces and also of certain plant species? One thing is, the last thing I'll say is that the idea of traditional harvest, this idea, I love it. I think it's awesome. I think it's hard to regulate, right? It's not something that's enforceable. It's more of a culture shift or a mantra of how we want things to happen. We can regulate what we harvest. We can regulate where we harvest, and we can regulate how much you harvest. But it's really hard. It's really hard to regulate an ethic. And so just want to throw that out there. So I support it and how we build it in for our trainings and all that. it's just one of those things I think from an enforceability perspective, it makes it very, very challenging. If we're not, back to Senator Green's perspective, if we're not very clear about what we're allowing. So I'll have to think about more about the actual language, but in general, I do support some oversight.
Thank you, Luke. Senator Pa and then Peter.
I just want to say, Luke, I absolutely understand where you're coming from. And even though I'm pushing for access, I often think about the same things you're saying, and finding that balance, right, between what shifting from something that is so restrictive to having more access to state lands and also to plants. And where do we find that balance? And I think that we have a couple of things in here that Steph and Stephanie had pointed out that tries to put some of that balance or guides in allowing the DNR to be able to manage some of these state lands for specific reasons and purposes. And again, there was another section that had language about if there were anything urgent, or if there was any urgent issues, that would be something that would allow the DNR to be able to do rulemaking around. And it's in one of the recommendations somewhere. I don't know if Stephanie, if you can find it. I think that's really important too. And so maybe we'll look at that really quick here.
Yeah, I think it was in this number 10 that it would limit.
It's number 4, right there at the
Number
bottom.
4.
Yeah, keep going down. There you
Right
go.
here. Yeah, thank you, thank you.
we
I thought
go.
it was in there somewhere. Yeah.
Yeah. So as respond to any urgent or emergency situation, including an immediate threat to public health or safety and substantiated risk to public health, safety, or ecological integrity. That also in place with some of the other stuff that was already brought up. And I also want to go back to the other screen we were at, where it says the DNR can establish and is allowed to establish a protected species list. And that protected species list can prohibit anything from being harvested for reasons. They can set up a protected list of something that can be harvested, but with limits on them applied to them. They can establish something that would prohibit or limit and also have a permit. So I think that also gives them a lot of leeway to be able to protect species that they feel are vulnerable without, I would say, without the approach now, which is everything is restricted. And so I think this one is really important. And I wonder if that might also answer some questions for you and other members here as well when it comes to finding that balance. And I want to also bring up that it's an ongoing, this work is not done after we're done here on the task force. On one of the recommendations, it does say the DNR and stakeholders would continue this work in having conversations and meetings. And then also that we revisit what we've collected in the 5 years or whatever, or honestly annually. But there is a time period there to say at least 5 years from now that we really look at the data that's collected, the research, and reevaluate. And I think that there's a lot of room for that, whether it's the annual meetings or the ongoing work, or that's that 5-year kind of timeline that says 5 years we must do this. So to Steph's point before, this work is not, this is the beginning. And it isn't going to be perfect, but I don't believe this is also the last time we're going to visit this issue.
Thank you, Senator Pa. Go ahead, Peter.
uh, from what Senator Paz, it can't be the last time that we visit this issue in order to do this properly. Um, I supported everything that pretty much that Luke's saying in terms of guardrails, and obviously when we're talking about removing whole plants, uh, there needs to be guardrails. Uh, it's just difficult to um, in people's minds. And again, I'm thinking of the public and our citizens. If you tell them they need a permit to harvest a dandelion, they're not going to respect that request. I mean, they're just going to say, "What are people talking about? What are they thinking about?" In those kinds of regards. That doesn't change it. And I would agree that maybe we can strengthen that the language about the DNR, not just can, but that they need to develop a list in conjunction with stakeholders of what needs to be prohibited or restricted or requiring a permit. And I would oppose anywhere in the statute that it says the words no limit. This is about personal use. That is a limit. And I realize it's one that is difficult to enforce and difficult to quantify and requires a viewpoint change in people, but that's what education's about. And people who are, for the most part, active and respectful foragers, they carry that ethic with them right now. To go back to impacts, I want to emphasize exactly what Senator Green brought up about the fact that we have an example, admittedly limited, but Washington County sees 1 million visitors a year, and they have 55 permits they issue. And the question is, which I think is I think the point he makes is totally legitimate, is that the sky is not going to fall immediately because of this change. And I think that maybe it's a bit of a sea change, but at the same time, we've also heard testimony from DNR personnel that some of this activity is going on right now and is not being enforced to the letter of the law. So I don't think there's guardrails. Absolutely, we need. Thank you.
Peter, thank you for chiming in. And Kelly, I'm glad to see your hand up because DNR is a critical partner in this work, right? And the work moves forward in partnership between community partners, everyone on this call, and DNR as the agency with authority to manage state lands and public waters. So, yep, please chime in on what you're hearing from this conversation and where you're at right now, and if there are changes that could get you into the I can live with this.
Thanks. Kelly Bruns, DNR, and I guess I'm just continually reflecting on the modifications and the adjustments that have been made. So personally trying to work through that to come to a point where knowing my hands-on experiences out there on the landscape, just trying to understand like how reactions might come forward, like how things could be implemented, how staff are going to respond to these changes, not only the staff that we have there out at the unit levels that are our naturalists or educators, but also, as people have mentioned, our ranger staff and then our resource management professionals. So I think two things I just wanted to maybe talk with the group about. I'm a little confused on recommendation 1 and 2, where we have, it seems like, conflicting notes around roots and again, uprooting whole plants. I have highlighted in recommendation 1 where somebody did actually put some input in from the January 6th meeting that including roots is confusing. So we have like keep roots in the list of harvestable items in the potential revised language. And then in recommendation 1, towards the harvestable items included, where we have the flowers, leaves, shoots, and roots, there's a note that said roots not removed from this bullet. But then when we go into recommendation number 2, it's also noted that the root reference is very inconsistent with recommendation number 1. And then under the potential revised language towards the bottom, the new statute, if we would propose new statute language, it would include not allowing uprooting of whole plants, no harvesting of roots, for example, except by permit. So clarification around this language around roots. Roots is always concerning for me, and I think other resource staff that you will work with within DNR. I would be really interested in hearing like Bradley or Nibby talk a little bit about the traditional ecological knowledge and harvesting of roots and where that falls within TEK. Many times over many years, one of the things that's been concerning for like our staff is like in a typical weekend in a campground setting where we might have hundreds of campsites, it's very common to see people who don't understand rules go out and pull plants, flowers, lilacs, snipping sprigs of lilacs, but uprooting whole plants to decorate their campsite, their picnic tables. And for many years, we've gone in that educational moment to talk with the individuals that are there at the park to try to educate them on why we haven't allowed people to uproot full plants for sustainability reasons and making sure that we're trying to educate people on regenerative practices that we have with resource management. So I'll stop there, but the roots, and then I made some comments on seeds. We have a really, really difficult time with some of our prairie restoration work where we're trying to regenerate the landscape, finding native seeds. We have a really strong bison collaboration program that we work through, and some of our goals are specifically around making sure that the genetics of those bison are as natural as we can, and there's not a lot of cross pollination. And our seed sourcing right now can be really difficult to do a lot of our prairie restoration work. So adding seeds in as just now a new item that could just be open for collection, I'm sure would be very challenging and difficult for a lot of our resource program staff that work now very around the clock to maintain a seed bank to make sure that our state parks have those native plants available and restored on the landscape. So those are going to be just, my opinion, are going to be really difficult to try to educate and talk through. And not to say that we can't, but I just want to bring up some of the challenges that we do face on the landscape right now. And whatever the reasons are, there are many that we've been challenged with trying to keep our landscape as native as we can. Those are just a few examples. So thank you.
Kelly,
Thanks,
thank
Kelly.
you.
Steph, before we go to David, I'd like to just respond to a couple of Kelly's points. Did you
Yeah,
want to?
please. And I was just going to do the same thing, but you sound like you're ready. And then I also, as you're summarizing probably what I was gonna say too. I want to invite Nebe and Bradley to comment on the harvesting of whole roots or plants and traditional ecological knowledge before we go to David. So go ahead, Stephanie.
That's good.
Yeah, thanks. And Kelly, thank you for sharing those questions and concerns because they're important ones. In terms of the potential conflict between roots in 1 and 2, the intent, and I am not going to promise that it is clearly stated, but what we were trying to do was say roots would be allowed. However, there would, what we mean there is like not fully prohibited. The version we had sent out by email yesterday did say that like roots would, it would not allow harvesting roots except by permit. What we're looking at now is reflects Peter's suggestion that some common and abundant plants, should potentially be permissible without a permit. So the idea here is to not prohibit roots completely, but also not to permit them in an unrestricted way, but to allow DNR to either, based on the species, prohibit its collection as a root completely, allow it with a permit so that there can be, kind of observation and controls, or if it's something like dandelions and DNR agrees that those could be harvested as whole plants without damaging the ecosystem, maybe those would be allowed without permits, and that would be a DNR choice. In regard to the seeds, I think that's incredibly important. I would envision language kind of similar to what we've kind of compiled from all of your inputs regarding roots, and would welcome your assistance or the assistance of anyone you might like to refer us to at DNR, to kind of frame what that might look like in terms of the language. And Kelly, does that kind of answer your questions, or is there more there that I may have missed?
Thank you. That answers my questions. I just take a little more time to collectively think about these things, so appreciate it.
I think too, Kelly, your questions in some ways were similar to Greg's questions about the definition. And this conversation is making me wonder if recommendation 1 and 2 don't become the same, where it's a creation of a new statute. And we're talking about part of the creation of that new statute is defining non-commercial personal use, commercial use, honorable harvest, and sort of having almost like sections to the statute. So it's together and we're not trying to, because I agree. Obviously, folks have been confused about why is roots included in the definition. Well, because people could harvest roots, but some roots would need to be, would need to have a permit. So I think there's an opportunity to improve clarity there. And I want to invite if Bradley or Nebe have comments related to traditional ecological knowledge and the harvesting of whole roots or plants, to Kelly's question. I don't know if either of you have anything to add in terms of your wisdom and understanding traditional ecological knowledge.
I can add a little bit, and it was covered in what was just explained that it'll be the restriction of roots and whole plants that would be looked into and set in the future. And we already heard about the dandelion, but there's other relatives out there that a whole plant or the root is collected for medicinal or food purposes, or maybe it's ground up and put into some smudge, as it's called. So that does go on out there. And what we are seeing is that there's an increase in seeking a recognition of traditional healing in some aspects of human services, of where practices like that are going to be legitimized in their own way and should be recognized and not prohibited if someone needs a certain plant and it just happens to be the root that indigenous people should have access to. And generally about TEK, uh, that's going to be relationship building with tribes, different tribal members, uh, and then also a recognition that some of what that may be shared may not generally want to be included in any public data. So even as the state where when decisions are made, there's usually a trail and the supporting statements and documents. Sometimes a tribe or tribal member or someone who is going to be bringing information forward, uh, sometimes that information and perspective was gained through ceremonial practices or uh, in a way that may not be specifically for general public. Like there's some Anishinaabe people that have knowledge that even though I'm Anishinaabe as well, I may not have the capabilities to know or practice. So it's something that's gonna, as we continue down the road and we're gonna be looking at TEK, something we're gonna have to deal with. And we have been looking into it at the DNR around TEK and how can certain data that the on the tribe's own purview be able to be protected.
Thank you, Bradley. Nibi, do you have anything to add at this point about traditional ecological knowledge and the harvest of whole plants or roots?
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. Nibio Gichida Ikwe, water warrior woman, a tribal member of Bad River Band of Lake Superior, Ojibwe, representing Minnesota Indian Affairs Council. I do have my own personal opinions about roots, but I think what's most important is that we remember that from the TEK perspective, that roots are very nutrient dense and highly valued for their vitamins, minerals, and ability to heal. There's a lot of strength in roots, both literally, figuratively, and spiritually. So I just think that's important that we think about that. Obviously, I do believe that roots should be available for Indigenous ways in their cultural connections to living with the land and water. Um, I also feel that it's important that we remember that, from my perspective, traditional ecological knowledge is not necessarily telling the specific details of all of these plants, but that we remember that what our true goal is living sustainably, making sure that these plants and medicines are available for the next 7 generations. So TEK, to me, and as an overall way of life, meaning that we have a great respect for all of these plants. And in doing so, you make sure that you harvest sustainably. So I actually feel that I personally am looking out for the Indigenous way of life, but I remain neutral and I will support whatever you feel is best at this given moment. I think that anything that we do now is better than what we had in the past. A lot of people have reached out and said to me that their main perspective that they're looking for is just access in general, being able to access the plants and medicines that were gifted to all of us. And I also think that it's important that we do value Dr. David Schultz. I think that he's a very wise man. And I think that his perspective from his law background is also very beneficial as we move forward. So if we're able to blend modern science with TEK in a harmonious and balanced way, that's going to be the best way forward for all of us. A long time ago, I created a little slogan where traditional ecological knowledge is the key wise solution to moving forward in a good way. I believe that full-heartedly, and I'm also looking out for all people as I say that. So that's my perspective, and I'm willing to work with all of you, and I'll hand it over to Dr. Schultz. Miigwech padamia.
Thank you. And just a time check, we have 45 minutes left together. So the invitation after David, you share your thoughts is just where are those elements of the recommendations that are still for you lacking the kind of greatest clarity and where are the opportunities to move into consensus. So go ahead, David. Thank you for waiting for that
course.
conversation. I appreciate it.
Okay, no problem. Okay, so I am going to, David Schultz, Minnesota, representing the Minnesota Foraging Alliance. I am going to speak, as a law professor for just about a minute or so here. And there's a classic problem in administrative law, where the question becomes, if I were to bring in a glass of water, and the glass of water had 4 parts of benzene in it for every billion drops of water, I ask my students, is this glass of water potable? Is it safe to drink? And my students go all over the place at some point, and finally someone will say to me, well, I don't know. Don't we need somebody who's an expert to figure out what it is? And I say, that's the right answer. That's what we're supposed to do. And the reason why I mention that is that we're struggling here to figure out what it means to say um, personal, sustainable, use, et cetera, et cetera. And part of what I'm trying to get at here is that we, we we're never going to come up with that answer as a group here. The way we're going to come up with that answer is to basically say, let's go out and gather the data. Let's go out, let's say to DNR that we recognize foraging as this right, that we're concerned, that we also want to recognize traditional ecological practices. And then what we're going to do is over the next few years, study that. Figure out what it actually looks like in terms of what's appropriate amounts for harvesting. Because otherwise, again, we're going to constantly be chasing our tail here. So that's the reason, come back to it, why I've suggested several times this linkage. A linkage between recognizing foraging, recognizing that we need to have a period of time in which we have something looking like a moratorium, but during that moratorium, we study what the policy is. And again, I come back to what Senator Pa has said. I think we have quite a few guardrails in place right now. And at some point, we can figure out if, in fact, what would seems to be a reasonable amount of consumption or use. I come back to it again as a law professor that under the Minnesota Administrative Procedures Act, any type of rulemaking is supposed to be backed up by substantial evidence along with taking input from the public. And so that's what I've been pushing all along. And I think that's this task force is what we're pushing here. So I'll draw my comments to a close and just simply say at this point, I think what we have to do is to provide that window, provide the study, gather the data, and that's going to help us eventually figure out what we actually mean by personal non-commercial use that is sustainable. Thank you.
Thanks, David. And recommendation 6 right now does talk about studying the impacts of foraging, right? And then also the latest recommendation, which is sort of an altered version of the moratorium, talks about how important it is to collect data. So I just want to acknowledge that those two pieces are in there as well, and that you've brought up the Administrative Procedures Act. It does require state agencies to have that 60-day notice, right? And comment and solicitation period and a chance for citizens to sort of request public hearings and to have public input. And so I think just to kind of lean back into that, there is an administrative rule that requires agencies as they do rulemaking to have a public process. And I think that as an outsider, it seems to me that DNR is coming to the table wanting to work in a new way. And my understanding is that, part of why this group was created is maybe that relationship was strained and wasn't working as intended. But I see DNR coming to the table, wanting to be partners in this work, and I hear you saying how important that is as well. Rebecca, go ahead.
Thank you, everyone. My name is Rebecca Montgomery. I'm a faculty member at the University of Minnesota in Department of Forest Resources. And I have two things. One, I just wanted to highlight Matt Wappler's post about specialty forestry products and wondered whether we can learn from some existing language around these types of things to help us sort out this issue related to how we talk about the products themselves, seeds, berries, nuts, flowers, leaves. I think in what Matt put, it mentioned plant parts, which is maybe more inclusive. So that's the first thing, but I think I want to put on I am trained as a Western scientist doing Western science evidence-based work, right? And right now, there's not very much Western science evidence. And I think that Dr. Schultz really highlighted this as well, that that isn't there. And so we're going round and round and round. People are getting worried. But we don't have a lot of evidence to back up that worry. And I think we can't have that evidence necessarily until we we changed what some of the rules are right now. From a ecologist perspective, and that's my background, there are other places we could look for evidence of impact or comparative evidence in the sense that we do have evidence of the impact of deer browse in some of these places on plant communities. We have evidence of herbicide and herbicide drifts impacts on these plants and of herbicide uses in our in our natural areas and urban areas. We have evidence of how much bears eat and other organisms eat out on the landscape. How much does a bear need in terms of berries? And we have information on that. And that could give us information on, okay, if people are, how much does a bear eat? I think I mentioned this before, but I think it was misunderstood. But if a bear eats, 50 gallons of berries a day, how does that compare to how much is being harvested from that place by people, right? Are we close to that, or are we much tinier than what something like a bear or a deer is eating out there? So I'm suggesting that, or just highlighting that there might be comparative information about how these other organisms forage that can help us think about maybe how much impact our foraging might have. And it might tell us that it could have large impact, or it could tell us that it's tiny compared to the impact of things like, deer browsing, the impact of herbicides that are used, the impact of management activities. So I just wanted to both note that I think the lack of information on impact is making this a very difficult and round and around kind of conversation in a framing where the language is asking for evidence. And then also call out that we might use a comparative approach to think about impact or lack thereof. And hopefully that made some sense to you all. And I thank you for taking the time to listen.
Thank you so much for chiming in, Rebecca. I'm thinking that as we refine recommendation 6 around studying, or even recommendation 10, which I'd like to go there soon, because that's a new one that we haven't really discussed, or it's been added back in. that getting the language right from a scientific perspective, like you just shared, would be helpful. Um, I, I'm just a little bit of a time check. We have about a half an hour left together. I would like to create some space for us to talk about this 10th recommendation. But before we go there, I just want to create a moment for folks who maybe haven't had a chance to speak up yet to chime in on the conversation so far, to talk about anything that you're still sort of struggling with related to the recommendations or wondering about, anything that you feel like would benefit moving forward and building consensus as a group. You all obviously will have opportunities as an individual to continue offering specific and suggested, changes through the 20th, whether you do that in a written way or connect with one of us at MAD to have a conversation. But I just want to open it up for a minute for folks to say, I really want to talk about this specific recommendation or change or et cetera. Angie, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
Thank you for the opportunity. So Angie Gupta, University of Minnesota Extension Forester, and I am looking at recommendation number 8. And this is for the DNR to work with the Minnesota Department of Ag on the noxious weed law. And I am very confused about what we think we need to change in the Minnesota noxious weed law that would spark this recommendation. So I had significant problems with it. I think I understand the noxious weed law well. I teach it very regularly. And I do not think there's anything in it today that prohibits foraging on period. And I think it's important to remember this is a species by species law. And there are a number of species that while they might be forageable, I think it would be deeply irresponsible either for personal health or for the landscape to actually enable foraging. And it is, I think, relatively easy to enable foraging in the specially regulated category as the law exists today, and remind people that depending on what you want to forage, foraging isn't prohibited. So for example, it is perfectly legal as it stands today to take garlic mustard leaves. And so the question is, what do we think we're trying to solve, right? And thus, why do we keep it? I would recommend just removing it.
So, Angie, I think the essence of number 8 was about exploring modifications where people could safely transport potentially invasive species. And the understanding was that there was laws prohibiting the transport of invasive species or noxious weeds right now, and that further consultation and engagement with NDA to explore whether certain plants could be transported off the land would be something of interest to the group.
Yeah.
So I think that was the essence.
So, and just to be clear, the noxious weed law allows the transportation of material so long as it's not propagating parts. So for most plants, that would be the roots or the seeds. For a few knotweeds in particular, that could be the whole plant. And so garlic mustard, for example, the most commonly eaten part of it is the leaves, right? And so it's legal to transport that. It's not, the leaf of a garlic mustard is not a propagating part. So wild parsnip, for example, the root is the edible part. That is the propagating part. But I'll tell you, as a forager and a plant person, I do not think it is worth the potential third-degree chemical burns that one might get when they harvest that plant to want to change a law to make that more accessible. I think that's just sort of, I would recommend people not harvest that, for example. And so again, there's a couple of things that make that law unique in that it is very species specific. It already enables transportation so long as it's not a propagating part. And when you actually look at the individual species, I think the few that you might want to make the argument that they are propagating or there are propagating parts that could be forageable, I don't think you would actually land at a recommendation to change it. The other one that I'll just throw out is that knotweed one. So the knotweed stems are edible and apparently quite tasty, but knotweed is a horrible plant to manage. It can grow through foundations. And I actually strongly suspect we don't want anyone to move any propagating part because it is such a hard plant to get control of. So I just think in that case, foraging would not win. Like infrastructure would kind of win the what do we value most conversation. So I see Matt's hands up, so I will be quiet. But my recommendation would just be to remove recommendation 8.
Matt, go
thank
ahead.
you.
I don't know if you're responding to Angela or Angie, or if you have another comment. We welcome both.
I am. So again, Matt Wappler with Minnesota DNR Division of Forestry. I guess in response to Angela, from a departmental perspective, we supported more of a softer approach with this language because, just given the nature of the legislation authorizing this task force and what was directed, DNR we don't have the statutory authority to deal with the noxious weed law. We have to follow it ourselves on state land. So rather than making decisions on state lands regarding invasive species, non-propagating plant parts, we just would prefer to, work with our counterparts at MDA and come to some understanding in that sense. So that's all I have.
Angie, go ahead if you have a response or a
Yeah,
clarifying question.
Yeah, I'm just curious to know why you just can't do that as 2 agencies and why it would need to be included in the recommendation. I mean, so like MDA has authority, you're absolutely right. We all have to abide by that. So DNR is a part of all. And it's very confusing to me why we would include it in this recommendation. Thanks.
Matt, do you have a response to that? Why that feels important to DNR or anyone else, I guess, on this? Yeah, Matt, you can chime in and then I'll go Nebe and Greg.
I would say it's just part of our partnership as I guess a sister agency, so to speak.
Okay, thank you. Nebe and then Greg.
I just wanted to state that I actually agree with Angela. I feel like I've learned a lot from her. And I think that it also would fall in line along with what Senator Green was saying, as we need to simplify in order to get more people on board. So I also agree that we should just not include recommendation 8 at this given time. Miigwech Paramia.
Thank you, Nebe. Greg, go ahead.
Yeah, Greg Qualley, Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, and I would completely agree with that. After going through this and understanding the authorities between the Department of Natural Resources and Department of Agriculture, I'd just make a motion that we remove this recommendation and deal with the ones where we're having a lot of controversy, or we find the ones that have some green lights on them and try to codify that and unify those recommendations a little bit. Thank you.
Appreciate you chiming in, Greg. And Senator Pa also said removing recommendation 8 is okay with me. I'd like to see what others think. Feel free to use the chat to chime in on the removal of recommendation 8, or if anyone has concerns about the removal, please chime in, raise your hand, so we can make sure to hear you, hear your perspective. Again, in maybe, 5 minutes or so, I would like to transition to recommendation 10, but Angie, thanks for setting a good example. I'd like to just welcome anyone else that has a specific concern about another recommendation to chime in right now. We can, move the screen here to the recommendation that you're feeling concerned about. We just want to give you all an opportunity to share any other specific concerns or recommendations before we have some discussion about recommendation 10.
Stephanie, I'll chime in here. Gary Wyatt, University of
Thanks,
Minnesota
Gary.
Extension educator in our forestry team. On that first, actually go back up to the first recommendation under commercial use. I wonder if there needs to be a statement there on commercial use that refers to permits and direct people to a permit process for commercial use. And then I had a comment on seeds. I know Kelly's been talking about from the DNR folks about seeds. I know we have an extension educator, Kara Pollack, that's actually teaching people how to collect tree seeds for northern climates and maybe gathering seeds from southern Minnesota to move to and propagate and produce seedlings for northern Minnesota climates and so forth and plantings. I haven't seen a lot of people foraging for seeds, but there might be a problem with some seeds. Obviously, there's some seeds that are very rare, but I don't see a major issue in this legislation or this task to do it. Roots, I get it. You're digging up plants, but as we talked about before, maybe there's not a lot of people digging those up, but obviously that needs to be monitored by the DNRs managing those areas that are being foraged. I didn't think much about the limits of DNR or the creation of DNR to limit foraging. But then the more I thought about it, gosh, does that give them a rubber stamp? I think Senator Green mentioned that one time. Does that get a rubber stamp to almost control or limit all foraging in all state lands and so forth? That some captions of DNR creating limits and so forth and prohibiting foraging in certain areas. Just a thought. We need more data, as many of you have suggested. I don't know why DNR has not collected that data over the years, but I really like the opportunity of an optional or voluntary online survey for foraging people. And I think that was listed in one of the recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Yeah, go ahead, Peter.
This is Peter Martignacco with the Minnesota Mycological Society. I I think it's really important, with all of these uh, things involving, the issues, whether it be, uh, the seed conversation that Kelly has, brought up, gathering other things. Um, DNR developing, lists that require permits or are restricted. I think a key to this and what's been lacking is that the stakeholders here, foragers, plant foragers, herbalists, native communities, all of them have knowledge and information. While it may not pass peer-reviewed scientific evaluation, it does not mean that it's not true. And it should guide us. And it's that collaboration and interaction that will make this whole effort successful, both from a standpoint of allowing foraging access and also assuring proper protections and conservation happens. The kinds of things that Kelly talked about, digging up or pulling up whole plants in a camping area. Okay, why is that a bad idea? I think when you educate people, they go, oh, yeah, that was probably a bad idea. So, I mean, I think some of these things we don't, you know, they're concerns, but I think that with, proper evaluation, those things can be answered in in cooperative agreement very quickly. But it's the nitty gritty that's important. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. And thanks for bringing in multiple ways of knowing, and that data comes from multiple sources, including people's lived experience on the land. I just maybe feel like I want to say last call, but and not really. I want to transition to recommendation 10 because we haven't had task force discussion yet. But I do want to give anyone else who has a recommendation or a change to sort of chime in. And Greg, I see that your hand came up. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
just a technical question here. I mean, somewhere in our rules, I see that it requires an 80% consensus in order to move a recommendation forward. And I kind of went through the numbers here, and I think there's maybe only one or two recommendations here that even come close to that. Most of them are in the 70 percentile. So, I mean, is that a hard and firm figure that we have to adhere to?
Great question, and one that we discussed with Senator Paz chair yesterday. And it is what was adopted in the charter, that you would all work towards 80% consensus. You also can make amendments to your charter and adopt for changes to be made. So that's maybe how I would respond to that right now. Um, and if we could put a pin in that, that's an important question. I'd like to see if there are any other specific comments for changes to recommendations or concerns before we actually dive into number 10 here, because we have about 15 minutes remaining together. Okay. Let's hop into this recommendation 10. This recommendation appeared in a, I think, December 12th version, which included language about a moratorium on rulemaking. There was a lack of consensus after that December meeting, so it was removed for the January meeting, but now added back in and revised pretty significantly. So this new recommendation 10 talks about having a data-informed evaluation period for foraging policy, recognizing that statutory changes, expanding foraging and harvesting, access required time for monitoring data collection and research. And it outlines that the task force supports a collaborative review with the legislature, task force, and DNR to really study this over a period of 5 years. And that during this period, the commissioner may not adopt rulemaking that materially reduces, narrows, or alters the scope of harvesting access established by the statute. And we've talked a little bit about the evaluation period, including, let me see, sorry, the evaluation period, the commissioner may adopt narrowly tailored evidence-supported rulemaking during this period, only when necessary to implement statutory requirements, make administrative or technical improvements that do not materially reduce access, comply with federal law, and respond to any urgent or emergency situation, including an immediate threat to public health or safety. So I want to just open this up now to ideas for improvement, clarifying questions related to recommendation 10. And David, go ahead.
Sure. Since I'm the one who, David Schultz, a Minnesota Foraging Alliance task force member, since I'm the one who many, many meetings ago proposed some variation of a moratorium, I just want to speak to it briefly here. And I think you did a very good job summarizing it. Maybe I'm missing it, but maybe one more thing I want to say is during that moratorium, also for the DNR to be studying, again, with the evidence they're gathering here, whether we need any of the foraging limits, and this maybe links us back to our earlier discussion that we had a few minutes ago here regarding can we come up with limits or not or something like that. So I don't know, can we add a little bit of that language in there to say that during that moratorium period, part of the evidence to be gathered is to determine whether foraging limits are needed, and if so, how to work with the public in terms of coming up with appropriate limits. And I'll stop there.
Thank you, David. Peter, go ahead.
This is Peter Martiniak from the Minnesota Mycological Society. I just want to say that this moratorium does not preclude any of the other DNR limitation, the implemented limitations that other sections of this document are proposing. I mean, so this is, I've gotten some feedback from some people in the DNR, that says, oh, well, this ties our hands. And that's not its intent. And, as far as I'm concerned, totally. And we are within these recommendations also asking the DNR to evaluate permitting requirements, other restrictions, that are appropriate. So, I mean, this moratorium is strictly to provide clarity. Thank you.
Go ahead, Luke.
So this is for David a little bit, just for clarification, so I'm understanding. This moratorium, as if I heard it correctly, we're still going forward with, so something would still be passed in state statute. So whatever recommendation that's developed and agreed upon in number 2, right? Well, actually 1 and 2, because 1 defines 2, that is state statute. And then you're saying after that is passed, there's this moratorium so we can do this research work before to make it more restrictive than what is passed by state statute. That's my first question. Is that what you're saying? Or you're saying no to recommendation 1 and 2 at all, and we just stay flat of where we're actually at right now and do this, do what you're saying here in number 10.
Okay. May I respond?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. Just want to be sure. Okay. David Schultz, Minnesota Foraging Alliance. Okay. If I'm following you correctly, and I may not be following you correctly here, I think I still support, going back to it, I still want the codification of foraging, in the law. Now with the moratorium is to say, and we've been stuck on what's the appropriate limit there. So I still want to say we codify the right to forage in law, and then use part of the moratorium. And during the moratorium process, we gather the data and evidence, or DNR gathers the data and evidence, so that we can determine if rules need to be made, additional rules need to be made beyond our recommendations here for, let's say, personal limits, et cetera, et cetera. That's how I'm sort of trying to express it. Does that make sense or not?
Yeah, I think so. I'm just, so if I understand correctly, then you're supportive of whatever we pass up there, you're codifying, but you're also saying it's now available. And then so the door is wide open. And so so foraging is wide open until we do 5 years of study to see if we want to make it more restrictive than from what it currently is.
Wide open in the sense of subject to, I think, Senator Pa and others have talked about it, to the guardrails that are already in place.
Already in place, or the ones that are being proposed in number 2?
I think being proposed in 2.
Okay, thank you. That's the clarification I was.
Okay. I didn't understand your question before. I'm sorry.
No worries. Thank you.
So I see Rebecca and then Senator Pa. I also see a question from Kelly here that says, would the moratorium prohibit us, DNR, from defining the terms we need to? Would the definitions be part of the rules? I think maybe what was just clarified here is if we go to number 1, where it says implement statutory requirements enacted by the legislature, I think that's assuming that the statutory requirements would be passed from, recommendations 1 and 2, right? That's passed. Those rules are changed, but then it's like no further changes. Let's just study for 5 years and move from there. And go ahead, Rebecca. And also, I just want to chime in, the rulemaking by DNR does say that active permit rulemaking projects on the list here is the use of state parks and other recreational areas. So it sounds like there is, and maybe you've already discussed this, but that there is some open rulemaking right now happening with state parks and other recreational areas. Rebecca and then Senator Pa.
Rebecca Montgomery. I wonder if in the third paragraph of this part where it says under statute, if you could put under the proposed statute or some clarifying language so that we know it's not current statute, which statute it's referring to.
Very good. I see Stephanie making those changes. Senator Pa.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of clarify a little bit that with this moratorium, it would not, I should say this, the 5 years that we're saying is under the moratorium would consider all the recommendations we are recommending if that passed into law. That would be what would be in place for that 5 years. Now there are a lot of points within those recommendations that gives the DNR authority to change certain things, like what we talked about with the response to an urgent or emergency situation, with also their ability to be able to narrow or restrict certain parts of the state lands because of their authority to be able to restrict because of research or things that are being done on that land that restricts people from being able to use it. So, I mean, there's lots of things in place, but what we're trying to do is say, if we adopt these recommendations, all the ones that we're talked about that we approve, and that does go into law, in order for us to effectively be able to monitor, collect data, research, evaluate, it can't be changing all the time. Like it can't be like a ton of rulemaking every single year because then there's not adequate time to really evaluate our statutory changes and how that impacts our lands. And so we have to have that time in which the DNR is not changing, making their own rulemaking every single year that would then skew that the impacts. So if we can give a time in which says let's pass these statutory changes, let's evaluate it for a certain period, still giving the DNR ability to make rulemaking and changes as needed for urgent or emergency situations and be able to do some of the things we've already laid out. I won't go over all of them, but all the stuff that we discussed within that time period. But after that 5 years, that we come back and really look at the data and the research and say, what did we learn during this period and how should we move forward? And that forward means that we could go back and just like any law that we have in the state of Minnesota, we could make changes to those laws. We could go back and make recommendations to say, because of what we learned during this evaluation period, this is what we're recommending changes. And that can happen. So, but the period is protecting so that we are actually being able to gather information and make sure that we can make those, I think, those informed policy decisions.
Thank you, Senator. I just want to take a moment to invite our DNR staff on our task force to chime in and comment if you have anything additional to add on this recommendation 10. I see some chat and questions in the chat, but I just want to give you an opportunity to come off mute and share your thinking on um, recommendation 10, that the idea is a new statute would be enacted and implemented, rules would be changed, and then there's a period of study that happens.
Hi, this is Kelly from Minnesota DNR. I think what's challenging for me is the broad concept of rulemaking and what could be and sometimes can be put into those rule packages. They're complex, and I'm just can speak on behalf of like Parks and Trails. Some of the areas that we look at when we're working on rulemaking tie into all different types of operations on those like state park administered lands. So sometimes the rules allow us to manage our camper cabins or how we use a day use area, or sometimes changes in fees or quiet hours, or um, different things that might impact like wildlife management within a unit, such as like feeding wildlife. Can people geocache in different areas? Um, Check in or check out times to campsites. So the rules that we add into those packages are vast, and they cover all kinds of operational issues. So it would be difficult for me to um, just kind of get behind a moratorium on that, knowing there could be significant impacts to how we provide a variety of opportunities for the public outside of foraging, and how, it could impact our revenue streams, safety of our guests and our public, how we manage certain facilities on our land. So just some other thoughts behind rules and how they really impact our day-to-day work in managing our state parks and trails system.
Thank you, Kelly. And I see Stephanie highlighted this yellow section just to specify, because I think what you're pointing out, and I put it in the chat, that there's a lot of just with state parks and recreation areas, trails, there's a potential list of rural areas that would be changed. So maybe we need to be very specific that we're not saying we want to limit your review of alcoholic beverages or fire restrictions or pets in these places, but it's specifically for harvesting and foraging. So we could maybe clarify that language. And if we did, Kelly, would that help you get into consensus?
Need some more time to think about that.
Sure.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
that's okay. Thank you for chiming in. I know I've put you on the spot and DNR on the spot today, and I appreciate you sharing your perspective. I see that we are almost at time. I think I'd like to just, if we could, Jennifer, quickly share the next step slide as a reminder to the group about what you can expect next and how we would love to engage with you moving forward. Our invitation to each of you, and we'll put this in writing in an email and follow up as well, that if you could continue to offer your ideas for improvement. You see Stephanie was making live changes. Please go ahead and do that. Peter, what you set as an example was excellent. You suggested specific changes. You made comments about the rationale. That type of feedback is really helpful to getting us a step further. If you are not someone who likes to write suggested changes but wants to just have a conversation, myself, Stephanie, and Jennifer are happy to have a 30-minute, hour-long conversation with you to continue to make changes. You will receive a revised version by the 23rd. That's next Friday. And then the invitation to all of you is to carefully review the recommendations between the 23rd and 26th to prepare for the vote on January 27th, which will be both in person and online. Senator Pa, I want to see if you have anything else to add, but I also see Nebe and Greg have raised their hands. So let's go Senator Pa if you have anything else, and then Nebe and Greg.
Thank you, staff. And I'm just going to reiterate really quickly that kind of what I said in the beginning, which is I'm hopeful that during this discussion that we were able to work out some of the questions, especially some of those questions that kind of clarifies some of these recommendations, and also that we discuss the revisions that could bring people closer to consensus. To Greg's question before, are we going to be able to hit that 80% that we initially put into the charter? I'm hopeful that we can. And if people are not at consensus, what we're really looking for is what are the changes you're looking for? Where are you stuck on? What does not work for you? And how can we address that? And I'm hopeful that we can do that before the next meeting, that we come back together to vote on these recommendations. I really would love to see that whatever comes out of this group is something that we all believe is good. We don't necessarily have to be thrilled about each one or feel that they are perfect recommendations, but that they are good recommendations for us to start with. And so thank you so much, everyone, for your hard work today and the work that we've done together.
I acknowledge we're at time and some folks have had to jump, but I do, Nebe and Greg, I see your hands up. Please go ahead, Nebe, and then Greg.
Nibi Ogechida Ikwe, I would like to advise, and I think that it's very important that we do have another meeting. I think there's a lot of things that still need to be said, and I would like to hear the wise words of everybody who hasn't spoken yet today, especially about the things that they feel are most important to them, especially if we would like to get to the 80%. I feel that we do have the capability of coming to a common ground, but right now it feels rushed. And I would prefer that we all feel in harmony and balance in our work. I know that's how I like to leave my work, is I have a good feeling about it. And right now I have a feeling of it feels a little bit chaotic. And I would prefer that when we move forward with this, it's with good energy, good intention, and that all of our hearts are together, because we are stronger together. I fully believe that. So many people here are so smart and so wise, and I just want for us to come together in a good way, because this affects not only us here, but for the next 7 generations. So I'm willing to make the time to meet again. And if anyone else is willing to do that, I would greatly appreciate your time as well. Miigwech Padamia. Thank you.
Yeah, Greg Qualley, Backcountries and Hunters and Anglers. Question on the voting procedure. I went through and totaled the votes on all of these things, and we have a low participation rate of 10 and a high participation rate of 14 of the committee members. And the percentages are kind of interesting on some of these, and we kicked a couple out, which is good, but I'll send this stuff to you, Stephanie, just for conversational purposes and maybe to add it up. And are we going to vote on number 10? Do we have time to do that now, or are we beyond our quorum?
Well, I think we're at time right now, but voting will happen on the 27th, Greg. So the last votes that we've had are just to assess consensus. Where are people falling? How strong of consensus do we have? We could do a quick poll of where people are feeling about recommendation 10, but I do want to respect that we're over time now. And probably one of the best ways to continue to engage is through writing your comments specifically on recommendations, also having a conversation, and then we'll circle back with Senator Pa related to Nebe's suggestion about engaging in another conversation.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you all for making more time out of your busy schedules. You're all volunteers who care about this work, who have full-time jobs and lives. Thanks for making time to be a part of this conversation and to improve these recommendations. I appreciate you all today. Okay.
Thanks, everyone.